Before you judge me, let me tell you how I got here. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 62 years old, and until not long ago, I believed my life, quiet, modest, and predictable, was still mine to live. I used to be a high school English teacher in Columbus, Ohio. For decades, I lived surrounded by books, teenagers with restless energy, and the comfort of words that never betrayed me. I taught Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson, but I also taught my students how to notice the small details others missed, the kind of details that could tell you everything about a person's truth. My son, Lucas, used to admire that about me. When he was little, he would say, "Mom, you always see things nobody else does." Funny, isn't it? Years later, that very gift was twisted against me. People began whispering that my sharpness had dulled, that I was forgetful, maybe even losing it. But I remember everything. Especially the day my only child led me, with a smile on his face, into the cruelest betrayal I could imagine. Stick around till the end of this story, and if my words move you, don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a like, and share this video. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you think. I wasn't just a mother who cooked dinners and kissed scraped knees, though I did plenty of that too. I was a woman with a mind sharpened by literature, a habit of observation, and journals stacked high in my attic, filled with notes about the world. My late husband used to joke that I could have been a detective if I hadn't fallen in love with poetry first. Lucas grew up watching me write in those notebooks, underlining phrases in red ink, circling patterns no one else noticed. I thought I was teaching him the value of curiosity. Maybe I was teaching him something else entirely. How to mimic sincerity, how to perform emotions he didn't feel. Still, I never stopped being his mother. Every choice I made, even after Richard, my husband, passed away, revolved around Lucas. He was my axis, my North Star. That's the dangerous thing about love. It blinds you to cracks forming in the foundation. On my 62nd birthday, I woke up before the sun, a little flutter of anticipation running through me, like I was a girl again, waiting for a school dance. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I lived alone now in the same brick bungalow Richard and I had bought years ago on the east side of Columbus. The walls held our laughter, our arguments, our dreams. I had downsized parts of my life, but not that house. It was the one constant left. I brewed coffee, the rich smell filling the kitchen, and mixed batter for pancakes, Lucas's favorite when he was a boy. I still set 2 plates on the table, though I knew the second one might stay empty. Old habits of hope are hard to break. By 9, the stack of pancakes sat cooling on the counter. I reheated them once, then again. I glanced at my phone a dozen times. No missed calls, no new messages. I scrolled through old texts from Lucas just to remind myself his words had once been warm. Lately, he claimed he was busy. Work, marriage troubles, always something. I told myself that today would be different. Birthdays meant something, didn't they? I brushed my silver-streaked hair, put on my soft blue sweater, the one Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary, and even dabbed on lipstick, though no one but Lucas might see it. I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror, whispering, "It's just another year, Eleanor. He'll come." Noon came and went. The plates stayed empty. My stomach twisted with hunger, but I didn't eat. Eating without him would have felt like admitting defeat. At 1 o'clock, just as my heart began to sink into that familiar pit of loneliness, the doorbell rang. I nearly dropped my mug in the rush to answer. And there he was, Lucas. His smile stretched across his face, too practiced, too smooth. He held a plastic-wrapped bouquet from the grocery store down the road. Yellow carnations, the cheapest ones they sell. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his tone clipped, almost rehearsed. I swallowed the sting rising in my chest and pulled him into a hug anyway, inhaling the faint scent of cologne I didn't recognize. He patted my back stiffly, the way a colleague might, not a son. You came, I whispered, letting hope wash through me like sunlight breaking clouds. Of course, he replied, stepping back quickly. His eyes darted toward the kitchen, then away. Get dressed. I made lunch reservations? Reservations? I laughed softly. You thought of everything. For a moment, my chest swelled with a fragile warmth. I didn't question the odd way he avoided my eyes. I didn't ask why he hadn't called sooner. I just grabbed my purse, slid into a pair of shoes that pinched my toes, but looked elegant, and followed him out the door. The sky that afternoon was a pale Ohio gray, heavy with clouds but streaked with sunlight in places. As we drove, I watched the familiar neighborhoods slip past. The corner diner where Richard and I used to get pie. The library where Lucas had checked out his first Hardy Boys book. Nostalgia mixed with unease as we turned onto a highway I hadn't expected. Where are we going? I asked lightly, forcing cheer into my voice. You'll see, he said, eyes fixed on the road. The further we drove, the more that flutter of anticipation in my chest hardened into something else. An ache I couldn't quite name. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, gray under the weight of heavy clouds. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in my lap, watching the familiar landmarks of Columbus fade into farmland. The silence inside the car pressed against me like a stone. So, where's this place? I asked after several miles. I tried to keep my tone light, but the unease in my chest deepened with every passing exit. You'll see, Lucas replied. His eyes never left the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles pale. I glanced at him, trying to catch some clue in his expression. For years, I'd prided myself on noticing the subtle things others missed. The twitch of an eyebrow, the shift of a smile. But his face was a mask, smooth and unreadable. We drove past rolling fields, barns weathered by decades, maple trees already blazing red and gold with autumn. Normally, I would have admired the beauty, maybe even quoted a line of Frost or Whitman. Instead, all I felt was a tightening in my stomach. Something was off. When he finally slowed, my breath caught. Ahead stood a sprawling building of red brick, its windows lined with beige curtains. A wooden sign at the driveway read, Maplewood Senior Living. My throat closed. Lucas, what is this? He cleared his throat. Mom, we need to talk. This place, it's safe. You shouldn't be living alone anymore. I blinked hard, refusing to believe what I was hearing. Safe? I've lived in that house for decades. I taught hundreds of students. I read more books this year than you have in your entire life. What do you mean safe? His jaw tightened. You've been slipping. You forget things. The neighbors told me you left your car lights on for hours last month. I laughed, sharp and bitter. So now leaving my lights on means I'm senile? He parked the car and turned to me, voice clipped. It's not just that. You repeat yourself. You get confused about dates. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I found a solution. Before I could respond, he stepped out, opened the trunk, and pulled out a medium-sized suitcase. My suitcase. Recognition hit like a punch to the gut. It was the one I kept at the top of the closet, packed only for vacations. My voice shook. You went through my things? Don't make this harder than it has to be, he said flatly. He carried the suitcase toward the entrance, as if it weighed nothing. I remained frozen in the passenger seat, every nerve screaming. My own son had packed my belongings and brought me here on the day I thought we'd celebrate my birthday. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. A cheerful receptionist greeted us, but the warmth in her voice felt rehearsed, like an actor reciting lines. Lucas set down the suitcase and signed a stack of papers, barely glancing at me. When he finally turned, he slid something across the counter toward me, a card. Happy birthday, It read in gold script. I opened it with trembling hands. The inside was completely blank except for 3 words scribbled in his handwriting. Enjoy the rest. The emptiness of the card cut deeper than any insult. My chest burned, and my voice broke into a whisper. Lucas, how could you? He didn't answer. He just handed over the final form. Power of attorney. His signature already on the dotted line, mine forged beside it. They led me down a hallway lined with beige walls and identical doors, each one marked with a number. My room was small, an adjustable bed, a narrow dresser, and a window facing nothing but a brick wall. I sat on the edge of the mattress with my coat still buttoned, the suitcase untouched at my feet. The silence roared in my ears. There would be no cake, no candles, no laughter, just 4 walls and the echo of betrayal. Hours passed. I finally opened the bouquet he had brought. The flowers had wilted in the car, petals limp and brown at the edges. They looked exactly how I felt, discarded. That night, I lay awake listening to the shuffle of nurses' shoes outside, the faint buzz of a television in the distance. The mattress was too firm, the sheets smelled of bleach, and my chest ached with something deeper than heartbreak. I replayed conversations with Lucas in my head, his constant excuses, his clipped tone in recent months, the way he always seemed to look through me rather than at me. I thought about every time I had said yes when I should have said no, every time I had covered for him, loaned him money, defended him against friends who whispered doubts. And now, here I was, erased. The next morning, I asked the nurse for my phone. She hesitated before shaking her head. Your son said you don't need it anymore. He had the line disabled, said it was too confusing for you. My chest constricted. Too confusing? I had spent my life teaching novels so complex that grown adults struggled to analyze them. I had mentored students into Ivy League colleges, and now I was deemed too confused to handle a phone? It wasn't just cruel. It was calculated, and that's when it clicked. The whispers from neighbors. The sudden distance from friends who no longer visited. Lucas had been planting seeds long before this day. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of suspicion. He wanted the world to believe his mother was unraveling, so when he finally locked me away, no one would question him. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the bed, fury blooming hotter than grief. I had loved him fiercely. I had forgiven mistakes that would have destroyed other relationships. But as I sat there, stripped of dignity, staring at a blank birthday card and a locked phone, something inside me hardened. The Eleanor Hayes who believed love was enough. She was gone. What remained was a woman who understood she had been betrayed not by a stranger, but by her own blood. And if I didn't find a way out, they would succeed in erasing me. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The days inside Maplewood blurred together. Morning wake-ups at 6 sharp, breakfast trays of lukewarm oatmeal and coffee that tasted faintly of tin. Bingo at 10, chair yoga at 2, endless reruns of old sitcoms echoing from the common room. I tried to keep my mind sharp, but it felt like being trapped in a loop where the hours had no edges. My roommate, Doris, was a woman in her late 70s who spent most of her time dozing in her armchair, her mouth half open, a soft whistle of breath rattling through her chest. At first, I thought she barely noticed me, but every so often, she'd jolt awake and mutter about her daughter who hadn't visited in years. One evening, as the light outside our small window dimmed into shadow, Doris turned her head toward me and croaked, "Don't wait for them. They don't come back." Her words hung heavy, and though I knew she wasn't speaking about Lucas, it pierced me all the same. On the 3rd night, I noticed Doris clutching an old church bulletin, the edges yellowed. She kept circling a set of numbers printed on the back, whispering as she traced them with her fingertip. "Do you know what those are?" I asked gently. She blinked, her gaze unfocused. "Numbers win. Numbers always win." She shoved the paper toward me, then slumped back into her chair, already drifting into sleep again. I glanced at the numbers, puzzled, until something stirred in my memory. I had a habit, back in my teaching years, of slipping lottery tickets into the pages of books I was reading. Little tokens of whimsy, half believing I'd find them years later like a surprise gift from my past self. Could it be? That night, I pulled out the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice I'd stuffed into my suitcase before Lucas dragged me here. Between the crinkled pages near the middle, a folded slip of paper slid free. My breath caught. It was a lottery ticket dated just weeks earlier, one I'd forgotten entirely. My hands trembled as I smoothed the ticket on my lap. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed, the hallway beyond our door quiet, except for the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes. I didn't want to believe it mattered, but curiosity gnawed at me. I tucked the ticket into my sweater pocket and waited until nearly midnight, when the common room emptied and the staff thinned. There in the corner sat an ancient desktop computer, the screen dim but functional. I sat down, heart pounding, and typed in the numbers. For a moment, I thought I had misread. I refreshed the page, stared harder, counted twice. $15 million. The breath whooshed out of me. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle the gasp. 15 million. But instead of joy, fear roared through me. If Lucas found out, if anyone did, they'd swallow me whole and spit out the pieces. I printed the confirmation, folded it small, and tucked it into my bra, feeling the paper burn against my skin like a secret too dangerous to hold. The next morning, I met someone who would change everything. A nurse I hadn't seen before walked into my room, her dark braids tucked under a scrub cap, her smile quiet but steady. She carried a blood pressure cuff and clipboard. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. I'm Ruby. I'll be filling in today." Her voice was warm, not syrupy like the others who called me sweetheart or honey, as though I were a child. She looked me in the eyes, not past me. "You don't belong here," she said softly as she wrapped the cuff around my arm. I blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" She glanced at the closed door, then back at me. "A lot of folks need this place, and that's okay. But you don't seem lost." Tears pricked my eyes before I could stop them. No one had said anything like that since I arrived. Ruby squeezed my hand briefly, then continued checking my vitals as if nothing had passed between us. Later, when she returned to drop off medication, she lingered. "Why are you here, Eleanor?" she asked gently. I swallowed, debating whether to lie, then let the truth tumble out, about Lucas, about the house, the betrayal. Ruby listened, not just nodding along but truly listening, her brows furrowed, her eyes filled with empathy. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "My grandmother," she finally said, "was put in a place like this. My uncle convinced everyone she couldn't live alone, but it was just to get her pension. She died here. Not this facility, but one just like it. No one believed her when she tried to fight back." Her words struck like lightning. She knew. She understood. That afternoon, Ruby slipped back into my room, glancing around before pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "Don't ask how I found this," she whispered, pressing it into my hand. "Just trust me." It was a flyer for a local legal aid program, volunteer attorneys who came twice a month to help seniors with wills and disputes. My pulse quickened. I thought of the ticket hidden beneath my sweater, the fortune that could change everything, and the prison of beige walls tightening around me. For the first time since Lucas abandoned me, I felt the smallest flicker of power return. Ruby leaned closer. "You're not as powerless as they think." Her words settled into me like a promise. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the faint snore of Doris filling the silence. In my chest, something had shifted. Isolation still pressed on me. But now, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight I hadn't yet imagined, but knew I had to win. I didn't sleep the night before. I lay on my back, watching thin cracks on the ceiling turn from gray to pale, counting each inhale like a promise kept. At 4:30 a.m., the hall lights dimmed for shift change. The air smelled faintly of detergent and day-old coffee. That was our window. Ruby slipped in without knocking, already in scrubs and sneakers. Her hair was braided tight, her face set with the kind of courage people mistake for calm. "You ready?" she whispered. "As I'll ever be," I said, rolling up the confirmation printout and tucking it deeper into my bra. The lottery ticket felt like a matchstick against my skin. Not joy, leverage. She handed me a plain gray hoodie and soft black joggers. "You'll move easier in these," she said. "Put your coat over it, and leave the suitcase. Too loud." I hesitated, glancing at the closet. "My journals." Ruby's eyes softened. "I got the 2 on your nightstand. The rest, come back for them later when it's safe." She slid a small canvas duffel from beneath her cart. "Essentials only. ID, glasses, cash I fronted from my tip jar, burner phone. Jonathan's card. He's downstairs." "Here? In the building?" "In the loading bay. He's with the volunteer legal clinic today, so no one blinked when I added his name to the vendor list." She smiled, quick and fierce. "People don't ask questions when you carry a clipboard." Footsteps passed in the hall. We both went still. When they faded, she lowered the side rail of my bed and helped me swing my legs over. For a second, a tremor ran through me. Fear, yes, but also something bright and stubborn. I tightened my laces. Doris shifted in her chair and murmured, "Numbers win." Her eyes fluttered open, then closed again, like a curtain lifted and lowered. I pressed my fingers to her shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. It felt like a blessing. We moved. Ruby pushed an empty laundry cart. I walked beside it, head down, duffel tucked beneath the folded sheets. We cut through the medication room, a supply closet, then a narrow back corridor with scuffed baseboards. Ruby swiped her badge at a door labeled staff only. The lock clicked. Cold air hit my face in the loading bay. A man in a charcoal coat waited by the open van, documents in a folder held against his chest. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, awake the way lawyers are when they know the stakes. "Ms. Hayes," he said, voice low. "Jonathan Reed." "Hurry," Ruby breathed. "You've got 5 minutes before the kitchen crew shows." Jonathan helped me into the van, then passed me a manila envelope. "Cease and desist to the facility regarding any actions under your so-called POA. Notice of revocation filed with the county, plus a temporary protective order will firm up once we land." He tapped the envelope. "And a P.O. box address under a trust name. We're going to keep you invisible." I looked back. Ruby stood framed by gray light, hands fidgeting with her badge. My throat closed. "Why are you doing this?" I asked her. She swallowed. "Because nobody did it for my grandmother." Then she stepped forward, gripped my hand, and held on. "When you're safe, don't forget us." "I won't," I promised, and meant it. Jonathan shut the van door. We rolled into the soft wash of morning, leaving Maplewood behind like a bad dream that still had the power to reach for you. We avoided freeways for the first hour, taking side roads past silent strip malls and dewy soccer fields. Jonathan drove like a man who knew how to be careful without looking like he was being careful. "Dayton to Cincinnati," he said, eyes on the rear view. "You'll get on a southbound Greyhound there. Cash ticket, no name. 2 transfers, Lexington and Corbin, then Knoxville by late afternoon. I'll follow at a distance in case anything pops." "A bus," I repeated, picturing rows of vinyl seats and strangers' shoulders. It felt appropriate, anonymous. "What about my phone? My accounts?" "We've cut the line your son canceled and opened a prepaid for you." He flicked his chin toward my duffel. "No contracts, no record. Bank accounts will be in the trust. Willow and ink. You'll like it." When I glanced over, he smiled, almost shy. "Ruby told me you taught English." The bus station in Cincinnati was all hard plastic seats and fluorescent buzz. The ticket agent didn't look up when I slid cash across the counter for a same-day fare. On the platform, I pulled up my hood and adjusted my glasses, the duffel at my feet like an animal I needed to keep close. Jonathan waited near a vending machine, pretending to study snack labels and watching the doors instead. "Once you land in Knoxville," he said, "go to this address." He wrote it on the backside of a receipt. "Small house, month-to-month rental with an option to buy. Friend of a friend manages it. Utilities are on, keys in a lockbox. Code's the second line of your old school's address." He looked at me. "Thought you'd remember that." I did. I could recite the names on the English wing door list in my sleep. People think forgetting is an early shadow. They don't understand what the mind chooses to keep safe. I boarded. The driver didn't care who I was, as long as I stayed behind the yellow line. We rumbled south. Cornfields gave way to hills. The trees deepened into green that felt older than my pain. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and watched Ohio loosen its grip. By the time we crossed the Kentucky border, fear had thinned to something else. Resolve. I didn't know yet what rebuilding would look like. I only knew it wouldn't involve begging a son who had turned me into a problem to be solved. Knoxville's terminal was a maze of echoes and tired families. I took a cab, the old-fashioned kind you hail by waving, cash again, to a quiet street just outside the city core, where the foothills begin to ripple toward the Smokies. The house sat small and stubborn under a maple tree. Single-story brick, paint chipped around the trim, a crooked mailbox that read 53 in peeling numerals. I punched in the code, turned the key, and stepped into my new life. Inside, the air held that empty house smell. Dust, wood, a whisper of old rain. A sofa waited against a wall, a table with 2 chairs, a lamp with a pull chain. No photographs, no history. The quiet was not the sterile hush of Maplewood. It was a living thing, a choice. I set the duffel on the table, took out the fireproof pouch Jonathan had included, and slid the ticket and printout inside. Then, I pried up a loose floorboard in the hallway closet. Old houses always have one, and tucked the pouch below. A secret for a secret place. Only then did I let myself breathe. The next morning, Jonathan arrived with a stack of forms and a thermos of decent coffee. He had driven through the night, or maybe he just looked like he had. "First thing," he said, spreading papers across the table. "We build walls." He spoke quietly and cleanly, translating law into verbs I could hold. Revoke, assign, insulate. We established the blind trust with a financial advisor who knew how to disappear names and surface only legal entities. My lottery claim would route through that trust. My new mailing address lived in a strip mall post office 2 towns over. We opened a bank account with just enough to pay a month's rent, the rest to sit until we were ready. "Your son will try to file for guardianship if he hasn't already," Jonathan said. "He'll gather affidavits, doctor letters. We'll be ready." He slid a small recorder across the table. "Start a log. Every memory, every decision you make. People can argue your mind. It's harder to argue a paper trail in your own words." I clicked the recorder on. "September," I said, and heard the steadiness in my voice. "New address, new rules." When he left, I walked through the house as if I were measuring the shape of it with my steps. I made eggs. I washed the one plate I'd dirtied. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt and watched a breeze herd leaves down the street like small brown boats. It would be easy, I thought, to let the quiet lull me. But quiet is not the same as safety. Safety is built. On the second night, I took the prepaid phone to a diner that offered free Wi-Fi and bottomless coffee. The waitress called me ma'am without pity, topped my mug to the brim, and left me alone in a corner booth. I created a new Facebook profile with a grandmother's name I'd once admired in a novel and an avatar of a barn owl. When I searched for Lucas, his profile bloomed with concern. There he was, the dutiful son, palms open to the camera. "If anyone has seen my mother, please reach out. We're worried about her safety." 2,000 likes. Praying hands emojis. People who had never met me calling him brave. He had posted a slideshow of photographs. In one, I was at my old kitchen table, hands in flour, teaching a small boy to crimp pie crust. The caption read, "She taught me everything I know." My stomach tightened. He remembered enough to perform love. Maybe he didn't anticipate that I remembered more. I typed a comment under the post. Nothing that would expose me, but a splinter that could only lodge under his skin if he were the man I now knew him to be. Who ate the last slice of cinnamon apple when he turned 12 and forgot to say thank you? The person who kept the note in her pocket all day didn't forget. No one else would understand. The year he turned 12, he'd written a sticky note apology. "I'm sorry I took it, Mom. It was too good." I had kept it in my apron pocket, touching it with floury fingers each time I reached for the salt. I hit post. The diner TV muttered about football. A couple argued softly in the next booth about whether to get the pumpkin pie. I watched the notification dot flicker from posted to seen. Lucas's name appeared in the list of people who'd viewed it. The caption under his photo changed a minute later, from "She taught me everything I know" to "No one knows what she's going through." He disabled comments. I sat back. The coffee had gone cold, but warmth moved through me anyway. Not triumph, not yet, but the first proof that he wasn't untouchable. The mask, however perfectly fitted, could still be pried at the edges. The days settled into a rhythm I could live inside. Morning walks along a quiet road where dogs barked without malice. Afternoon calls with Jonathan, who guided me through the legal scaffolding we were erecting around my life. Evenings spent at the small desk by the window, stacking pieces of my past into neat piles. Old bank statements, utility bills, insurance letters. Anything that might later be necessary to say, I was here. I was capable. I decided. One envelope stopped me cold. A notice about a business we'd once run, Richard and I, long closed, but still listed as an LLC in some state database. A tickle of worry threaded through my chest. I set it aside, not because I wanted to ignore it, but because I understood the difference between a hunch and a case. I would build a case. I recorded everything. Called utility company at 10:14 a.m., negotiated rate. Read 3 chapters of The Sound and the Fury. Recognized narrative threads. It felt absurd, saying these things aloud in an empty room until it didn't. Until it felt like laying stones across a river, one steady step at a time. On the 4th night, I couldn't help myself. I opened Lucas's profile again. He'd posted a new video, eyes glossy. "I just want to make sure my mother is safe." The comments were turning, small at first, like fish changing direction under a smooth surface. Let her speak. Has anyone verified the story? Why disable comments on the last post? I closed the app and turned off the lamp. In the ambient dark, I could see my reflection faintly in the window. Not a victim. Not a ghost. A woman who had been cornered and found a door. I pulled the fireproof pouch from under the floorboard and held it a moment, feeling the weight of paper that could pay for lawyers and time and truth. Then I slid it back and pressed the board into place. "I'm done being hunted," I said, surprising myself with how even my voice sounded in the quiet room. "If it has to be a hunt, I'll be the one who knows the terrain." I lay down and finally slept, deeply and without dreams, the kind of sleep that comes when you've decided who you are again. Tomorrow, I thought as the dark lifted, we start tugging on threads. And somewhere 300 miles north, my son rubbed at a wound he couldn't show anyone, wondering who knew what, and when the whole costume might come apart. The first letter came folded neatly in an envelope with the county seal. I almost mistook it for a utility notice until I saw the return address. Probate Court of Montgomery County. My pulse thudded as I slid it open. Inside was a petition, Lucas's petition, to have me declared mentally incompetent. I read the lines again and again, as if repetition could make them vanish. The language was cold, bureaucratic, erratic behavior, inability to manage finances, vulnerability to manipulation. Attached were affidavits from 2 people I barely knew. A neighbor who once saw me stand in the yard at dusk, looking confused, and one of Lucas's old college friends who claimed I'd forgotten his name at a cookout years ago. My hands trembled as I flipped through the rest. Edited voicemail recordings, snippets of me sounding frantic on nights I'd begged Lucas to return my calls. A letter from a psychiatrist I had never met, warning of progressive cognitive decline. The edges of the paper cut into my skin, sharp as glass. It wasn't just lies. It was a performance dressed in official ink. I called Jonathan, my lawyer, voice shaking. "It's happening. He's dragging me to court." "Then we'll drag the truth in right beside him," he said calmly. "You're not alone in this, Eleanor. We've been preparing." For the next 2 weeks, my house turned into a war room. Jonathan stacked manila folders in towers across the kitchen table. Financial logs, legal notices. My daily recordings printed and transcribed. Dr. Elaine Carter, the psychiatrist Ruby had recommended, came to evaluate me in person. She sat on my couch for 3 hours, asking about everything from childhood summers to last night's dinner. When she finally set her clipboard down, she smiled gently. "You're one of the sharpest minds I've evaluated this month, Miss Hayes. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I wanted to believe her words could erase the ache in my chest, but betrayal doesn't vanish under professional reassurance. Still, her report would be ironclad. Proof I wasn't unraveling, no matter how Lucas tried to weave that story. Jonathan rehearsed with me like it was opening night for a play. "Stay steady. Don't rise to his bait. Look the judge in the eye. You've spent a lifetime commanding classrooms. You know how to hold attention." I laughed bitterly. Funny. All those years teaching teenagers how to analyze subtext, and now I'm the one reduced to defending my own clarity. "You're not reduced," Jonathan said firmly. "You're reclaiming." The courthouse in Dayton hadn't changed since the days Richard and I went there to pay a traffic ticket. Same marble floors dulled by decades of shoes. Same faint scent of paper and dust. Lucas was already seated at the front when I walked in. He stood when he saw me, wearing a navy suit and that polished smile he'd perfected. For a second, he almost looked like the little boy who used to tug my sleeve at school concerts. But then he reached to shake my hand, and the coldness in his eyes snuffed out the memory. "Mom," he said, just loud enough for people around us to hear. "I only want what's best for you." I pulled my hand back. "Then you should have let me keep my life." We took our seats. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, called the case. In the matter of Eleanor Hayes's mental competency. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lucas's attorney went first. He spoke with the cadence of a man who thought he was telling a bedtime story. "My client is heartbroken. His mother has disappeared, estranged herself, clearly under undue influence." He presented the affidavits, the edited voicemails, the forged psychiatric letter. Each lie dropped like poison into the room. When they played the recordings, my voice fractured, pleading, desperate. I saw the judge's brow furrow. Shame crawled over my skin. Out of context, I sounded exactly like the woman Lucas wanted me to be. Unstable, unfit. Then, Lucas took the stand. His voice cracked at the edges in just the right places. "Your Honor, I love my mother. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But she's not herself anymore. She's lost." I gripped the armrest until my knuckles whitened. When the judge nodded at me, I stood. My heels clicked against the floor, deliberate and steady, each step refusing to bow. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 62 years old. I am not incompetent. I am not confused. And I am not anyone's victim." I handed the judge a folder, Dr. Carter's signed, dated evaluation. Cognitively intact. No evidence of dementia or decline. Emotionally stable. The judge skimmed it, lips pressed tight. I opened a second folder. Here are my financial logs from the past month. Receipts of every bill I paid, A notarized affidavit from my attorney verifying my decision-making capacity. Phone records proving I sought legal counsel before ever leaving Maplewood. I paused, letting the silence draw taut. Then I added, "And I have more, but I'll save that, if I must." I didn't show the file with Lucas's forged signatures, his fraudulent loans, his tax scams. That was my ace, and it wasn't time to play it. Not yet. Turning to the judge, I steadied my voice. My son put me in a facility against my will. He took my phone, cut my line of contact, and now he wants the court to strip away what little I have left. My voice, my dignity. Don't let him. The room was still. Even Lucas shifted in his seat, mask slipping for the briefest flicker. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I need time to review these documents and Dr. Carter's evaluation. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Long enough for Lucas to spin more lies. Long enough for me to sharpen my truth. By the time I reached Knoxville again, Lucas had already doubled down. Local news stations ran footage of him outside the courthouse, his voice breaking as he said, "I just want to protect my mother from bad influences." He stared into the camera like a grieving saint. The comment sections erupted with sympathy. "What a good son. Prayers for your family. Hope she gets help." I watched the broadcast from my kitchen, arms crossed tight. There were no bad influences around me. Just me, Eleanor Hayes, the same woman who had stayed up nights grading essays, who had raised him on casseroles and love and grit. And now he painted me as a puppet. That was the moment I knew silence was no longer enough. Jonathan came by that night. I handed him a sealed envelope containing every fraudulent loan document, every forged signature, every tax return Lucas had filed under my name. "Send it," I said. "Not to the court, to the Department of Justice, anonymously." He flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. This will get their attention. But I wasn't done. Using the trust account Jonathan had built, I made a donation, $5 million, to a national nonprofit that protects elders from financial abuse. No name attached, but the timing wasn't subtle. Within a week, the nonprofit launched a campaign about unseen exploitation, using my case as a symbol. Whispers began online. Why is a son pushing so hard to control his mother? Why hasn't she spoken for herself? Lucas's image wobbled. Then came Sarah Miller, a journalist from a major newspaper. She reached out to Jonathan first, then to me. We met in a cafe 2 towns over, me in sunglasses and a hat, her recorder on the table between us. "Tell me your story," she said. I told her about Maplewood, the confiscated phone, the birthday card with nothing but "enjoy the rest." I didn't mention the lottery. Not yet. When she asked about Lucas's petition, I said simply, "He's not trying to protect me. He's trying to erase me." The article ran 2 days later. Mother or millionaire? The silencing of Eleanor H. It didn't name me directly, but the dots were too close not to connect. Online, the tide shifted. Commenters asked harder questions. Some doubted Lucas's saintly act. Something doesn't add up. Why silence her? Why is he fighting so hard? The second court date arrived colder, the Tennessee wind slicing sharp against my coat. Lucas walked in looking less polished this time, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Jonathan opened with a statement that cut through the courtroom like glass. "Since the last hearing, we've completed an independent psychiatric evaluation confirming Ms. Hayes's full competency, compiled financial logs proving her independence, and, through legitimate public records, discovered that the petitioner, Mr. Lucas Hayes, is currently under federal investigation for tax fraud and identity theft." He handed the judge the docket number. Lucas's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection! That investigation has no bearing." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down." Then Dr. Carter took the stand, calm and direct. She testified that not only was I mentally sound, but I was deliberate and thoughtful, entirely capable of managing my affairs. There is no medical basis for any declaration of incompetence, she said firmly. I looked at Lucas then. His hands gripped the table so hard his knuckles whitened. The mask cracked, a glimpse of raw panic slipping through. Finally, Jonathan presented a timeline showing how Lucas's attempts to seize control of my accounts lined up perfectly with large withdrawals from his failing business. Coincidence? The room knew better. The judge leaned forward, speaking slowly. Based on the overwhelming evidence, this court dismisses the petition. Ms. Hayes's autonomy and financial control are fully restored. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my papers. I didn't cry. Not yet. But as I walked out past Lucas, whose eyes burned with something darker than anger, I knew the war had only just begun. The courtroom victory didn't end the war. It merely shifted the battleground. 2 weeks after the judge dismissed Lucas's petition, headlines exploded. Lucas Hayes, local businessman, under federal investigation for fraud and identity theft. I read the article at my kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling beside me. Lucas's name was everywhere, not as the devoted son he tried to play, but as a man accused of betrayal on a national scale. Former clients abandoned him. His credit lines froze. His wife issued a statement through her lawyer. She was filing for divorce. Jonathan called late that evening. They offered him a deal, he said. 10 years if he pleads guilty. Longer if it goes to trial. I pressed the receiver to my chest. 10 years. My son's next decade laid out in concrete walls and metal bars. I should have felt triumphant, but hollow is the only word that fit. One rainy afternoon, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. Lucas and me on my 60th birthday, laughing with cake on my face. On the back, in his sharp handwriting, "You always believed in me." I'm sorry that wasn't enough. My fingers traced the ink, the same loops and slants I had once corrected in his homework. For hours, I sat by the window with that photo in my lap, but when the fire crackled to life that evening, I fed the picture to the flames. Not out of rage, not even grief, just release. The boy in that photograph lived only in memory, and I couldn't keep trying to resurrect him. Instead of mourning what I had lost, I poured myself into what I could build. With Jonathan's guidance and Ruby's encouragement, I launched the Eleanor Project. It wasn't just a legal fund for seniors. We built it into a lifeline. Lawyers on call, hotlines staffed around the clock, workshops to teach the elderly how to protect their finances. But the part closest to my heart was a small program we named Rediscovery. We hired volunteers to guide older adults back to passions they had set aside. Painting, gardening, writing. I knew too well how easily the world erased people once they hit a certain age. I wanted them to remember they were still whole. Sarah Miller, the journalist who had first written about me, invited me to tell my full story on national television. This time, I didn't hide behind sunglasses or aliases. The studio lights were warm on my skin. I wore a gray sweater, small silver earrings, no makeup, just myself. "Why now?" Sarah asked. I looked into the camera. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every parent thrown away by the children they raised. Every older adult silenced under the excuse of love. I was almost erased, but I'm still here, and so are thousands of others who deserve to be seen. Messages flooded in from across the country. Stories of betrayal, abandonment, and survival. I wasn't just Eleanor anymore. I was a mirror reflecting countless hidden voices. On a pale winter morning, I stood outside Maplewood once more. The building loomed, unchanged, but I was not the same woman who had been wheeled inside like luggage. Ruby spotted me before I knocked. "Eleanor!" she gasped, pulling me into an embrace. Her arms were steady, grounding. Inside, the halls were brighter. The common room had new books, real coffee brewing. Doris's old room had been transformed into a reading lounge. That afternoon, I spoke to the residents. Folding chairs lined the activity room. The staff had baked cookies. "I'm not here because I'm rich," I began, my voice steady. "And not because I was wronged. I'm here because I was silenced, and I know too many of you still feel that way. But listen to me. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. And you are not finished." Applause started softly, then grew, filling the room with warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for all of us. Snow fell on the first morning of January as I sat by the fire in my Knoxville home, my cat curled at my feet. I wrote a letter, not to Lucas, not to the world, but to myself. "Dear Eleanor, you were not crazy. You were not weak. You were a woman who loved deeply, and when they tried to write you out of your own life, you picked up the pen and wrote the ending yourself." I folded it carefully, placed it in a small wooden box, and set it on the mantel. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need recognition. I had something far greater: freedom. If you've stayed with me through this story, you've walked with me through betrayal, silence, and rebirth. And maybe, like me, you've learned that love without truth becomes a weapon, that silence is the soil where cruelty grows, and that even when the world calls you finished, you are not. I used to believe my worth lived only in the eyes of my son. But worth is not granted by others. It is claimed by us. Every day we choose to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep becoming. I discovered that resilience doesn't mean you don't break. It means you break and still decide to build again. So, if you are listening, whoever you are, don't let anyone erase you. Don't let betrayal define the borders of your life. Pick up the pen. Write your ending yourself. And if this story touched you, let's not let it end here. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs courage tonight, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because every story matters, especially yours.